I never expected an ordinary Sunday morning to become one of the most unforgettable days of my life. I was bracing for the usual shaky nerves that came with driver practice, maybe a sigh or two from my dad, Mark, but what happened instead caught me completely off guard. It began as a standard lesson in our aging, dented hatchback, sitting beneath the wide branches of the oak in our driveway. I'd passed that tree 1,000 times, yet that morning it felt like it was leaning closer, as if it didn't want to miss a word. And when my dad spoke next, not about pedals, mirrors, or turn signals, but about life, accountability, and trust, I went quiet. In that instant, I understood driving wasn't only about the road. It was about us, about the way guidance feels when it comes from someone who truly knows you. That single morning handed me lessons I didn't even realize I'd been missing. And the softness of that moment stayed with me far longer than the engine's vibration ever could. Greetings, dear listeners. Before I begin sharing this complicated chapter of my life, please support the channel. Subscribe, leave a like, and tell us in the comments which city you're listening from. It matters more than you think. Now, let's get into the story. I never thought I'd be in the driver's seat with my hands slightly unsteady on the wheel, my heart racing not from speed, but from expectation. My father, Mark, sat in the passenger seat with an easy calm, his hand resting on the middle console like an anchor. I'd always admired the way he carried himself steady, patient, quietly strong. Like even if everything around him collapsed, he'd still find a way to hold the pieces together. "All right, Kayla," he said in that low, even voice. "Remember the basics. Smooth hands on the wheel, eyes forward, check your mirrors, and breathe. Driving isn't only about moving from one place to another. It's about reading what's happening around you before it happens." "Ready?" I nodded, though the tightness in my throat made the motion barely noticeable. I'd been practicing for weeks, but doing it with him beside me felt different. Not because I feared he'd snap. He never did, but because his approval meant something deep. Even his simplest words always seemed to land with weight. We rolled out of the driveway slowly. Gravel popped beneath the tires, and the crisp smell of fall leaves seeped into the car, mixing with the worn upholstery. Dad watched closely, offering the occasional quiet approval or small correction. At first, it was strictly technical: how to ease onto the brake, when to signal, how to turn without oversteering. But just as I started to find a rhythm, he asked something I didn't see coming. "Kayla, do you know why I'm teaching you myself instead of just signing you up for a driving school?" I blinked and glanced over. "Because you wanted to?" He let out a soft laugh and my shoulders loosened. "That's part of it," he said, "but there's more. I want to see how you carry responsibility. Driving tests more than skill. It tests patience, awareness, and judgment. And it teaches trusting yourself, trusting other people on the road, and trusting me too." I swallowed, my fingers suddenly feeling heavier on the wheel. It was an unusual thing to hear during a lesson, but it felt right. Like he'd been waiting for the moment to say it. The streets were unusually quiet that morning. The kind of silence that feels like the world is holding its breath. I'd always loved early hours like that, the pale sunlight spilling across the pavement, the damp scent of grass, the distant calls of birds waking up. Everything felt sharper. Every stop sign, every turn, every glance in the mirror seemed more important. As if the day had slowed down just for the two of us. As we moved farther from home, my nerves softened to something I didn't expect: connection. Dad wasn't just giving instructions. He was sharing the kind of steady wisdom he'd collected over years. It didn't feel like a lecture. It felt like a conversation happening in pauses and silence between gear changes, in the calm moments after a turn. Then, right when I thought we'd settled, he asked another question that threw me. "Kayla, what do you think it means to truly know someone?" I frowned, unsure if he meant friends, family, or some kind of driving metaphor. To understand them, I said slowly, to know what they mean before they say it. He nodded, eyes on the road, but somehow still focused on me. Exactly. And it's more than knowing routines. It's noticing the small things when someone hesitates, when they go quiet, when they're scared but won't admit it. That's what makes you a good driver. And honestly, what makes you a good person? You pay attention. You respect people. You stay patient even when it's hard. His words sank deeper than I expected. I glanced at him and felt a warmth that wasn't just familiarity. It was like he'd lifted a curtain and let me see the way he moved through life. For a moment, I had nothing to say. I just held the wheel and listened. We drove in silence after that, but it wasn't empty silence. It was full of understanding and unspoken emotion. I realized then that learning to drive with my dad wasn't only about learning a new skill. It was about noticing care in its quiet forms. It was about the strength of mutual respect. By the time we turned back toward the house, I felt both relief and a strange awe. The lesson hadn't lasted long, but what it gave me felt huge. When I parked, my hands still buzzing with adrenaline, Dad reached over and rested his hand on mine. "You did well today," he said. "Better than you think." I searched his face for criticism, for a hidden and found none only. Pride, trust, and a steady kind of love that didn't need to perform. In that moment, something landed in me like truth. The lessons that matter most don't always announce themselves. Sometimes they arrive disguised as ordinary moments, and the soft rumble of an engine, in gravel under tires, in the calm voice of someone who knows you better than you know yourself. When we stepped out of the car, sunlight catching the edges of the oak leaves, I knew I'd found something important. Not just about driving, but about trust, about responsibility, and about the depth of the bond between my father and me. That morning behind the wheel, I didn't only learn how to operate a car. I learned how to notice, how to listen, and how to recognize the quiet power of being understood. And for the first time, I truly grasped that the most subtle lessons can be the ones that never leave you. I never believed one morning could change the way I saw my dad. But the more I replayed that drive, the more I realized it hadn't only taught me how to handle a vehicle. It showed me a side of him I'd overlooked for years. The next day, his words still echoed in my head, looping like the winding streets we practiced on. I woke earlier than usual, restless, replaying every pause, every sideways glance, every soft laugh. Later that afternoon, I asked if we could go again. Part of me wanted to prove I could do better. Another part of me simply wanted more of that quiet closeness from the day before. Dad agreed with a small smile, the kind that made me feel both seen and safe. We pulled out of the driveway, the engine's hum greeting us like something familiar. The neighborhood looked the same, but the sunlight was lower now, pouring gold across lawns and rooftops. I felt comfort and tension at the same time. Comfort because yesterday had brought us closer, and tension because I couldn't guess what today might uncover. After a few minutes, Dad broke the silence gently. "Kayla," he said, "yesterday, I tried to teach you more than steering and braking. Did it feel that way?" I hesitated, searching for words that didn't sound childish. "Yeah," I admitted. "It felt like you were showing me something bigger, like paying attention matters outside the car, too." He nodded, and I caught the faint crease at the corner of his eyes as he smiled. "It does. Driving is responsibility. In motion. Every choice, every hesitation, every glance, it all matters. And sometimes the smallest details are what keep you safe." I looked over at him and felt that familiar mix again, unsettled and comforted. He seemed to notice everything, not only the road, but me. I realized how much teaching he'd done over the years without ever sounding like he was teaching, just shaping my world quietly, through patience and presence. We drove past the usual routes and into the older side of town where the streets narrowed. The turns came quicker and the trees arched overhead like a tunnel. My nerves rose. The houses looked older too, slightly tilted, like they were holding stories behind their windows. Dad's voice cut in softly. "You're doing better than you think," he said. "Do you know why?" I shook my head, careful through a bend. "Because you're not only watching the road," he continued. "You're watching the whole environment. Most people don't notice the way shadows fall across the pavement or how leaves can hide a slick patch. But you notice. That matters for driving and for life." His words tightened my throat. I wanted to tell him I noticed him too, that I saw the effort, the care, the way he offered guidance without controlling me, but my voice wouldn't cooperate. Instead, I focused on the wheel, feeling it settle. Vibration beneath my palms, the way the car responded to small adjustments. It felt less like fighting a machine and more like learning a rhythm. And suddenly I understood what he meant. Attention wasn't just focus. It was respect. The silence returned, but this time it felt easy, filled with shared understanding instead of nerves. Then he said something that made my stomach dip. "Kayla, there's something I've wanted to tell you," he began, but I didn't know if you were ready for it. My grip tightened. Part of me wanted to ask him to stop, not because I didn't trust him, but because I could sense the weight in what was coming. But his tone stayed calm, patient, steady, unshakable. "You're going to face moments where you'll have to decide fast," he said. "Moments where one choice leads to regret and the right choice takes courage. And the biggest lessons won't always come from what I say. They'll come from what you notice, what you practice, and whether you trust yourself." I learned that the hard way. I swallowed, feeling those words settle like stones heavy, but grounding Dot, and then he surprised me again. "I trust you," he said. "I trust you to recognize what matters, to protect what matters. That's why I'm here, teaching you myself. Because I believe in you, and I want you to believe in you too." My vision blurred, not quite tears, but something close. It hit me that this wasn't just instruction. It was him handing me his faith like a torch. We kept driving, and the streets didn't feel as intimidating anymore. They felt alive with possibility. I thought about all the times I doubted myself, all the times fear had talked louder than confidence. And I realized doubt didn't have to be my identity, not with this kind of guidance beside me guidance that empowered instead of controlled Dot. We eventually pulled into a small park near the edge of town, quiet and half hidden by tall evergreens. It looked ordinary from the street, but inside it had winding paths, rustling branches, and the clean scent of pine. We stepped out and stretched, and I realized I felt clearer than I had in weeks. Dad looked at me, and for the first time I noticed something I'd missed. A slight tremor in his hands, a way he sometimes held tension like he was bracing for storms that never fully passed. "You're growing up," he said softly. "And part of growing up is realizing life isn't predictable. People will let you down, mistakes will happen, plans will change. But the way you respond, that's who you become. How you notice, how you care, how you act." I nodded, feeling the truth of it in my bones. Gratitude rose in me, gratitude for the driving practice, yes. But even more for the way he trusted me enough to speak honestly. He didn't force lessons on me. He offered them like tools, letting me choose how to carry them. As we walked back to the car, leaves crunching under our shoes, something inside me shifted again. Yesterday's nerves had turned into something steadier. Confidence, yes, but also understanding. Trust, patience, and love weren't separate things. They were braided together. When we drove home, the sky was painted in soft pink and gold, and I realized the roads we'd taken weren't just streets. They were the same kind of path he'd been guiding me along my whole life toward independence, compassion, and a quiet kind of courage that lasts. That evening in my room, I replayed the drive over and over, and one simple truth became clear. The most important lessons often arrive in ordinary packaging, spoken casually by people who care more deeply than they show. I knew I'd never forget my dad's voice when he told me he trusted me, and I knew that trust had quietly reshaped the way I saw myself in the world. The next morning, sunlight spilled across my room in warm golden bands, and I felt an excitement I couldn't fully explain. Driving had stopped being a chore. It had become something shared, like a conversation that didn't always need words. I could still feel the weight of my father's trust from the day before, steady and anchoring, making me feel capable in a way I hadn't known I could. When I came downstairs, Mark was already in the kitchen with his coffee, scanning the paper. He looked up, and for a second, we just held eye contact. In that brief moment, I felt the quiet understanding we'd been building with every mile. There was patience in his expression, and something else too, like he could see who I was becoming, and he was proud without needing to announce it. "Morning," he said, his voice carrying that familiar warmth. "You ready for today?" I nodded, trying not to show how nervous I still was, even though I knew he could read me easily. He smiled like he'd already guessed, and I realized again this wasn't really about driving. This was mentorship, trust, a rare kind of closeness that went deeper than everyday conversation. We got into the car, and the engine greeted us with its familiar vibration. Dad told me today we were going to face the highway, the part I'd been dreading most. My stomach fluttered, equal parts thrill and fear. I'd never driven beyond quiet neighborhood streets, and the idea of merging into fast traffic made my palms damp. "Kayla," he said softly as we approached the on-ramp, "remember this. Driving isn't just control, it's awareness. Watch patterns. Predict what people might do. Give yourself space. And trust your judgment. You can handle it." I took a deep breath, feeling the wheel in my hands, feeling the road stretch out, ahead like a challenge and an invitation at the same time. And when I merged, something surprised me. I didn't panic. I focused, I adjusted. I stayed present. Traffic moved steadily, and at first I kept my mind on technique, mirrors, signals, lane position, speed. But as the minutes passed, I started noticing more. Sunlight flashing off windshields, the rhythm of tires on asphalt, the subtle way drivers negotiated space without ever speaking. It was like my dad's earlier lessons had unlocked a new way of seeing, a way of moving through the world with awareness and empathy, not just focus. Then Dad spoke again, and I felt my hands tighten slightly. "Do you know why I've been so deliberate about these drives?" he asked. "It's not only about keeping you safe in a car. It's about building confidence for the moments you feel unsure. It's about teaching you to anticipate challenges and trust yourself when the road gets complicated. And if I'm being honest, it's also my way of showing you I believe in you, even when things get hard." My throat tightened. Love and pride were woven into his words, held steady by the gentle authority that always made me feel both protected and capable. I do trust myself," I said quietly, "and I trust you." He gave me a small, satisfied smile. That's all I needed to hear. We rode in calm silence for a while, the highway's steady rhythm matching the pulse of our understanding. Then a moment came that I still remember frame by frame. A car ahead merged unexpectedly, too close, too fast. Instinct kicked in. I signaled, eased off the gas, adjusted the wheel just enough, and created space without jerking or freezing. Dad glanced at me, eyes widening. "That was perfect," he said, his voice bright with surprise and pride. "Exactly how I would have handled it. Relief washed through me, followed by something better confidence that felt earned. It wasn't only proof I could drive. It was proof I'd absorbed the real lesson: awareness, patience, calm decision making after we exited the highway and returned to slower streets. Accomplishment settled in my chest, but so did gratitude. For the way my father taught without fear, for the way he trusted me into becoming capable. We pulled into a small overlook where you could see most of our town spread out below, the sun sliding lower and painting everything in soft pinks and golds. We sat for a moment, quietly taking it in. My hand brushed his on the console, and he didn't move away. He just let it rest there like an unspoken promise. Finally, Dad spoke. "Today you didn't just drive," he said. "You noticed, you listened, you reacted with care. That's what makes someone ready, not only for the road, but for life." I looked at him, emotion pressing behind my eyes, and realized he'd given me something bigger than a driver's skill set. He'd given me guidance, belief, and the feeling of being known. "I won't forget this," I said, my voice shaking. "Not the highway part, all of it. The way you taught me, the way you trusted me." He smiled, eyes soft, and messed up my hair like he used to when I was little. "And I won't forget how you surprised me," he said. "How capable you've become. That's what I'm proud of." Sitting there with the wind moving through the trees, I felt a calm I hadn't felt in a long time. These drives, these lessons, these quiet conversations, they had built something permanent. Not just confidence behind a wheel, but a foundation for life. Awareness, patience, courage, and the steady bond of trust between us. That day, I understood that the best lessons aren't always technical. Sometimes they're about seeing, listening, and responding with care. And as we drove home under the soft evening light, I knew I'd learned more than routes and speed limits. I'd learned something about love, how it can be quiet, consistent, and strong enough to carry you forward. With an open heart,